I'm delighted to welcome, I was going to say an old friend, but a long-time friend and associate, Ben Campbell, someone who made me feel very welcome when I first joined the university some 12 years ago, and introduced me to where energy plays into the social science realm. And of course, I've learned an awful lot more over the years about not just the work of Ben, but the role that clearly society plays and dominates when it comes to thinking about energy. So I'm absolutely delighted that Ben has chosen this first seminar slot, and he says he's got some really exciting things to tell us. And what we'll be looking at is domestic biogas in Nepal and Bangladesh, transformations around the heat of the hearth. Please mute yourselves. If you want to remain live vision-wise, that's absolutely fine. Pop the questions into the chat function, and then when Ben has finished speaking, we'll invite the questions to be asked. It's all yours, Ben. Thanks very much indeed.
Terrific. So am I audible? Everything's on? Tremendous. Yeah. That's fantastic. So many friendly faces I see. But I am slightly apprehensive about this first presentation of the work that came about from the Modern Energy Cooking Services Programme. So I'm now going to share the screen, and hopefully it will come up. And we go into this mode. And yeah, is that all good for people?
That's perfect. Thanks, sir.
Okay. I think I'll minimize the windows up there. And here we go. So some of you will know that I've been working on biogas in particular and in Nepal for over 10 years. And it was one of the first bits of research I did with the Durham Energy Institute that really got me on track with field work on energy systems in the developing world, in the global south. So what we're talking about here is a piece of research that's been building on the, let's say, decade of work that I've been doing on biogas. And it came about through collaboration with the MEX program. So what I called this was Positioning Biogas for Modern Energy Cooking Services, which is a program, I think 40 million funded, initially with DFID, and then it got incorporated into the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. And it's via the brilliant network facilitating capacities of the Low Carbon Energy for Development Network that a lot of the work with the MEX program has come about. And I'm co-chair of the LCEDN along with Ed Brown at Loughborough, who's the PI for the whole program, Modern Energy Cooking Services. And I put in a bid to do this work, which was to address the fact that there's very little social science work on domestic biogas systems in the global south, and there's been really quite millions of these domestic systems having been built, but very little attention to what effect they've had on households. So we wanted to look at some in-depth case studies in 4 different countries, we thought, which have had some profile for biogas installations. So this is Nepal, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Bolivia. So we had to reconfigure things so we could do things remotely, which was pretty hard because I'd had this plan that we'd send a team of social scientists and technically oriented people to spend a couple of weeks or so in a village, visit 4 households and get a sense of what the domestic system had meant to them over the years and over different generations as well. Then the cuts came to the ODA projects, and all of a sudden we had to do what little we could do to all finish by last July. So that was a pretty severe constraint, which we were resilient about and we adapted to, and we carried through with the idea that I'd been suggesting, that biogas has very different kinds of what I call biosocial materialities as compared to other kinds of renewables. And the edit in the household nexus of land, labor, and livestock. And this was a kind of relational, holistic attention to energy systems with social systems that I wanted to explore with some field studies. And also bring in the additional issue of policy context, because a lot of the examples I know best from Nepal, for instance, where biogas has been heavily promoted, it was to do with forest, nature protection, trying to keep the national park forests free from being the source of fuel wood for the poor communities living on the edge of the forests. So that's one kind of policy area. And another is, of course, sanitation, where you can combine your biogas systems fed mostly by cow dung with the addition of a input coming from the toilet. Talking of which, just in the last couple of weeks, we have had a publication, because I was co-supervising Natalie Boyd-Williams up at Stirling. It was an IAPITUS-funded NERC PhD, in which she was mostly looking at India, Northeast India in Assam, but also we managed just before, in August 2019, we were able to go and do some fieldwork there. So I helped set her up, do a little study in Nepal. So this is the result of that piece of research that she's done. So it's great to see that Natalie's brought that out, and it's published in Energy Research and Social Science. This is an image from that piece, which shows in diagrammatic form the domestic register. Okay, so on the left-hand side, the unit B is the input with the dung. We're going to see some of this in the film, the 10-minute film that's coming up from Bangladesh. So that gets macerated, made into a nice soupy paste, and released into the digester, into which so the input of dung and other materials, food waste, whatever it could be, and toilet, it gets worked on by the methanogens, the bacteria at work, producing the gas and displacing equal amounts of compared to the input of slurry, which comes out in the sort of slurry pit D on the diagram, which can be used as fertilizer. So there's a good circular renewable livelihood economy thing going on there, and the gas goes into the kitchen, and you can cook without smoky firewood in the kitchen. And this has been quite a transformation in the lives of many households. Now, take that diagram image in your mind, and lo and behold, what do we see next? It's modeled on the cow itself. So the cow, cow in its guts has the methanogens that we take into the biogas digest, the anaerobic digesters, to produce the biogas. This is obviously, you can see a screenshot from one of the sessions that Raihana was helping to put together, so that we could manage to do this thing from a distance under conditions of COVID. We were planning, would people have to do the interviews by phone, or could they make field visits? So it was all sort of a bit ad hoc, whether people could go or not. And luckily some site visits were possible, and that's what we got some of the film of. And it's Arif, thanks to Arif Talukdar, who's also a grand ally and contributor to the Low Carbon Energy for Development Network. Arif was part of the make-up conference for development of renewable energy technologies that the LCDN, myself, Britta Turner, Raihana and others, John Cloak from Loughborough, were all involved with hosting, and Arif was part of that. So there's sort of long-standing research relationships, which without which this project couldn't have been possible. And when we get onto Nepal, I want to mention Manoj Suji, especially, who did his work down in the southern part of Nepal. Okay, so moving on. Oh yes, this is some of the slides of the Bangladesh team. Partnered up, mixed genders for appropriate interviewing with the house we identified to. So the idea was, let me explain a bit better. In each country, we were thinking of looking at 3 different areas, different zones, because biogas isn't great for high altitude. There are modifications that can be made, but it's more in warmer parts of the country where the methanogens are happy at a sort of temperature of around about 25 centigrade. But so it includes some hill areas in Nepal, for instance, and some plains area near the Indian border as well. And in Bangladesh, we took one area which has is a kind of hill area where there are some Adivasi communities. Also that, very interesting. And then another area was called Satkira, closer to the West Bengal, Calcutta border area. And then there was Pabna, was the 3rd district in Bangladesh where we looked. So in each district, we go in and look at about 4 households and get some sense of the diversity of rich and poor, different ethnic, religious groups, get some idea of the diversity of people who are using biogas systems. So here we can see the idea of the circular economy that biogas enables. So bottom left, we've got the the cows in the stalls. Top left, we've got the dried slurry. So this is incredibly useful fertilizer material, soil conditioner. According to our Durham experts, Karen Johnson, it doesn't quite have as much carbon in the mix as would be desirable. So it's often the slurry is mixed then with leaves, with straw, with other kinds of biomass. So it's incredibly valuable input for sustainable farming communities. And so top right, we can see all sorts of mixed, I think squashes, there might even be some taro, broadleaf taro in some of the images. We have the taro stands, and other crops are made possible by the application of the slurry. And then bottom right, so we got here, the interesting thing is trying to understand how biogas in any cooking system fits in with a fuel stacking range of repertoires for cooking possibilities. So we see the pot on a gas ring here, behind which is a clay stove area with 2 openings there. Depending on supplies of fuels or whatever, or the need to feed more people than you were expecting when the guests, the families, they saw suddenly come along. Oh, the internet is not stable, it says, so I'll try to say that again. So when families have festivities, when guests turn up, they often need to use more than simply the biogas system that suffices for the smaller domestic unit. And right at the bottom right, we have evidence here of other kinds of biomass fuel materials, such as the dung patties and various twigs, etc. So we're going to see in the next slide the film, which will show some of these alternatives. So first of all, we're going to start, this is a sort of 10.5-minute film which doesn't have subtitles as yet. So I'll try, Raihana might be able to answer questions about conversations in due course, but I've taken some notes and I'll then talk over it. So here we go into the film so you can see what it's actually like. If I get the cursor, here we go. Hope this works. Right, there it is. Nice and easy to set fire to light. And this is a 1 ring stove. Some stoves have 2 gas rings. There's the cow in the background. I thought important to hear. Include her as well. So as a rough rule, if you have 2 or 3 cows, let's say 3 or 4, you can feed a good sized family. So here is some milk being prepared in the pan. Now this is outside. And this is where some biomass stalks of, I think it was mustard seed plants, is being used to heat up some dish of spinach. And it could be that the spinach is for feeding to the cows. It's a possibility. Often the cow, the animal feeding, processing, cooking areas are outside and use biomass. Now this farmer here has it's a great example of skilled practice. He's removing the feedstock. Here we go. He's wearing a fantastic shirt. How he keeps so clean, I have no idea. Very mixed species, small holding. This is for the inlet. So the actual dome, you can see a little spout at the back, but they're mostly buried underground. Mixed at least one to one. There are different possibilities and preferences. I think this is something that the user themselves finds the favored ratio for mixing water and the dung. He's using a stick here. Some of the systems have a metal kind of rotating blade or like a paddle to mix it all up into a delicious soup. Okay, so once it's all mixed and ready to flow away, he's going to release a holding slab of stone or wood. There it goes. There we are. So one cow often produces about 10, 12 kilos per day of dung. Now we have a different household. Now this is interesting. This was, I think, built only about, I think 5 or 6 years ago, this system here with this household, when the owner retired, and this is the helper. Now the owner is one of the Adivasi community, tribal community, so-called. And they're speaking, I could tell, it was indigenous language, not Bangla. You can see the pipes from the dung mixing system and the toilet there behind. And what he's going to do will remind you of the French winemakers of old. He's a very athletic gentleman.
Ben, just to highlight, no one can hear the audio on the video, but I don't think it matters for the content.
You can't hear?
Not the audio on the video. We can hear you, though.
If you remove your headphones, then we might be able to listen in. If you unplug your headphones.
Okay,
yeah.
that's true.
Possibly.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, so there's much more water being used in this case. I suppose when you are using your feet, maybe you prefer dilution. So he's explaining, I think, how it's trying to rotate the material around in a circular movement. That's one of our researchers asking him. More water. It's a nice looking grapefruit tree behind, I believe. Or orange. Oh, now they're talking about whether a motorized delivery of water through the pipe could be possible. The word pipe is international. Sometimes it gets blocked, the pipe, and needs to be cleared. So there's a certain amount of maintenance knowledge necessary. And here's the pipe coming into the big cauldron for refills. Could it have been connected for the pipe to be taken to the inlet unit? There we are. He's finished up, and now he's released it all, and he's washing it clean, nice and clean, at the end of that input work. There's a certain level he likes to fit it up to. So this guy, you know, he's a skilled servant of the household. So this is a rich family from the indigenous community who obviously have extensive kinship and other connections for labor assistance. So there are kind of many buckets of input. Yeah, and they were discussing how they could modify things and improve the delivery with pipe pressure. And now the researcher, I think, is talking about the neighbors, and she had seen another biogas system which had a stronger pressure. This is our last.
Your father and mother actually established
This is Arif talking.
And you are using around 25 to 30 years. Yeah.
30 years of usage here. That's a long time depth. It's peaceful, she said.
যদি লাকড়িতে রান্না করেন তাহলে কি ধরনের অসুবিধা হইতো?
লাকড়িতে তো জ্বলে না, কিন্তু গ্যাস তো একটা ম্যাচ দিয়ে দিলে সব হয়ে যায়।
সকালে কি রান্না করেন?
She's very happy with the system. All the kinds of food she could use. She can cook, use it for cooking. Fried food, fried fish.
আচ্ছা, মাছ মাংস রান্না করেন না?
মাংস হয়।
Yeah.
আর রাতে কখন থেকে কখন রান্না করেন?
রাতে নাই, আমাদের 7টা পর্যন্ত হইতো।
আচ্ছা, রাত্রে রান্না কখন কয়টা থেকে কখন শুরু করেন?
একটা থেকে
And then other family members, are they also using it?
এরা কি কোনো সময় সাহায্য করে আপনাদেরকে আসে?
করে চারটা
হ্যাঁ।
There's the man of the house. He comes and makes tea now and again.
ছেলেমেয়েরা আসে মানে আপনার ভাই বা আপনারা বাদ দিয়ে আর কেউ কি আসে মানে ছেলেমেয়েরা কে আপনার মেয়ে কিংবা এরা কি সাহায্য
না
করে?
মেয়ে নাই ওই যে পাড়া থেকে আসে
আচ্ছা পাড়া থেকে আসে
এসে সাহায্য করে
আচ্ছা ছেলেরাও আসে তাই না? আপনার পাশে কাজের লোক আছে?
ছিল এখন নাই
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা
And what's his profession?
আসলে কি করা হয়?
Kusi means farmer.
জমি জমা কি
This is a good farming household.
আচ্ছা
Okay, so that's our film. Oops, we won. I'm going to go back to the headphones though, because in my experience, it does prove the quality. Okay, so that was Bangladesh. Now I'm going to move you to Nepal, and I have to thank Manoj Suji, who's an anthropologist with a master's from Tribhuvan University in Kathmandu, who I've known for a few years, and he's been really helpful in the circumstances of having to do this work remotely. He did a whole load of interviews by phone. The major interviews he had done by phone. He had managed to find contacts and get people who were prepared to be interviewed, etc. But then there was a certain easing down of travel, and he was able to go in when it was right at the end of the research period in July, I think it was, down to Chitwan to actually meet the people in person and get a few photographs. It's not nearly, he didn't manage to get quite as much great film material as our team in Bangladesh, but there's a very interesting example here. So the majority people in this village of in Chitwan district, near the Chitwan National Park, is from the Taru indigenous community. And these were people who, before the settlement of the lowlands of Nepal, after usage of DDT to get rid of the malarial mosquito zone, they were the primary inhabitants. And then after the 1950s, a load of hill dwellers moved down into the space. What we have here, we can see the same kind of concrete dome set up as we saw in the previous diagram. And the point here is that we're in this context of nature conservation, the Chitwan National Park. There's a rhino, if you can see in the top right corner, a statue of a rhino. What happened was that WWF was supporting biogas in this area to remove the extractive search for firewood by the poor communities on the edge of the national park forests. And then, I don't know if you heard, there was a civil war in Nepal for 10 years, which ended in 2006. At that time, when a new group of people came into power with they stood for election for the buffer zone committee, which we can see down here on bottom right. That's the buffer zone center. And they decided, in the radical political thinking after the Civil War, that biogas should be scaled up and include the very poor as well, including the landless. And so in this village of Kumaraj, the head of the buffer zone committee organized the funding for 1,650 biogas systems in this house. I mean, we focused in on this village because we could see from the national census material that here was a huge density of biogas systems. So let's go and take a look. So that it was rather successful for a while, but then group, the community forest user group, got taken over by the opposing political party, who saw tourism and taking fees from safari of tourists to see the wildlife as more profitable. So the people then were not allowed to take their animals for grazing, which is what you need to produce the dung for the biogas. So after 10 years, it looks like, because those families that don't have the land or in order to support the animals to produce the dung, are now starting to turn away from biogas and move to other alternatives, back to fuel wood, or if they can afford it, to use LPG. But one of the residents of this area, I think it's important to just read this out. It's always the young generation who wants changes. We daughters-in-law and daughters in the family told our parents-in-law about gobar gas, gobar dung, and its benefits. And when it came to deciding, all family members decided as a whole entirety. We were in a joint family, my husband's brother, his wife, parents-in-law, and we were big families. When the gobar gas was installed, we felt a huge relief because we did not have to go to the forest to get firewood. Pots would not be black, and it was easy for washing dishes. And we did not have to suffer from smoke. These are key sort of health reasons for using biogas as well. It doesn't take such a long time in cooking, and when there is time saved from cooking, women can use that time in other sorts of work, or leisure, let's say, as well. They can engage in vegetable farming or give time for cattle. They can also earn from selling milk in a dairy. Those who work in an office can also have more time. So this is one example of one of the interviews which really states nice and clearly the perspective of biogas as compared to fuel wood. So time is running out, and I want to get some questions in. So let's talk about some of the discussion points. So we got two country comparisons, and within those countries there are comparisons to make as well. I haven't brought in the other cases in Nepal. There was a work in Pokhara and another work in the hills in Nuwakot as well. But I think the examples from Chitwan is like really, really interesting about that sudden increase in scale, and then the political constraints about access to broader biosocial materialities, i.e. pastures, and the access to the pastures that affected whether these domestic technologies could be successful or not. So this is all building lines of inquiry for further research, and it's how social scientists go about their work. And I think there are interesting potential collaboration points for thinking about innovation with systems to bring in these broader contexts. It's not just technical reasons why there are often problems or challenges with renewable energy technologies. There's very often, it's the governance of systems and the sort of environment in which they're situated. But we can say a key finding that I want to share is in both Nepal and Bangladesh. It shows that from the 1970s, 80s, there was an affinity of biogas systems with the interests and assets of quite well-to-do rural households, with more than 3 or 4 cows, for instance, with land, and with an interest in a kind of modernizing their lifestyle. In other words, showing to others, and this is often the important thing with anthropological understandings of technology innovation, is that people are, let's say, performative, expressive. They're signifying something about themselves and who they are in the community by using a cleaner form of cooking, by not having smoky kitchens associated with possibly coming to be associated with poverty and lack of options. But I just at this point, I'll say that the children of that generation, they are, though, they've developed a different kind of approach and set of aspirations, which is turning away from that well-to-do peasant lifestyle, and they're wanting office jobs and much cleaner don't involve at some point picking up buckets of dung. The Chitwan case also gives us that example where the context of biodiversity protection made the collective access to pastures really, really important. And for that, the inclusive approach that the buffer zone group were trying to do was really interesting, and was much more context for not just the domestic territory, as it were, but the more collective neighborhood territory that domestic householders were connected with and had access through. That Taro indigenous community, they used to send every day two people to look after the cattle, which were looked after all together. So one house would only have to send somebody to go and do that cattle work about every month and a half or so. There was a sort of rotational system that they had. Very interesting kind of indigenous governance of the local environment. And I've used this idea of the heat of the hearth, which is the title of a book by anthropologist Janet Carston up in Edinburgh. And it's all about how people grow up. They get made into human beings, into socialized human beings around the fireside. So much knowledge, including energy knowledge, is an embedding of energy in the active process of doing the cooking in the kitchen, chatting with neighbors, with relatives, understanding about relationships and where households fit in the grander scheme of things. So children learn of transformative energy processes and cooking practices, folding in that learning with learning about human social relationships and values. But each generation does this differently. So like I said earlier about the affinity with sort of well-to-do peasant values, this is shifting because every new generation redefines what it is to be good, clean, and healthy in their own times. And finally, in conclusion, I think I'd like to say, you know, renewables and innovation with renewable energy systems is always a struggle. I mean, the context in Bangladesh and in Nepal also is that the proliferation of retail outlets for LPG means it's a struggle for these biogas systems to compete because it's cleaner. If people can afford the LPG, that's going to be the obvious immediate fuel to use. And LPG aligns with new ways of thinking of the new generations, many of whom want to differentiate themselves from what their parents were in their sort of peasant connection to the land. So I just want to end with a plea. If anybody's interested, maybe we should start a small-scale biogas system for the DEI. If anybody wants to start an interest group, please get in touch. So with that, I'll stop the share.
Ben, many thanks indeed. Clearly, thanks for the clap, Felix. Yes, and Joel. Yeah, that's on behalf of all those who are muted. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask of Ben? I saw Laura's hand. Well, we've got two Lauras.
Laura Marziliani.
Yes, I saw your hand go first, Laura, and then we'll move to Laura Hepburn. Go on, fire away.
Oh, thank you very much, Ben. I wonder if you know that I'm conducting a line of research in Bangladesh on waste to energy, and it's also with application in cities like Dhaka, for example. And so you know that there is a huge scope for using organic waste in Bangladesh. So I was wondering whether you know anything that connects that sort of energy to the electricity grid in urban areas instead, because your research at the moment is focused on rural communities, right? So yeah, so I wonder if you know of similar projects in cities where perhaps biogas energy is connected to the grid and therefore reaching, right? And I'm thinking about city, there are lots of restaurants and also in relation to cooking, so they will have lots of waste, organic waste that potentially can be used as source of energy.
Thank you, great question. Indeed, with Raihana, who's on this call, our work, Energy on the Move, we looked at Dhaka. We looked at an informal settlement community, two informal settlement communities, in fact. And what we discovered was indeed there had been biogas systems implemented there in the 1990s, by the grand guru of Bangladeshi biogas, whose name escapes me. Professor Raihana will remember and put it in the chat maybe. Professor Goram, was he called?
Professor Gofran, Ben.
Gofran, that's it, Gofran. So, but what was intriguing is that we discovered this from doing a stakeholder interaction. These biogas systems had been put in the city. About, I think we heard 20 at least of them in poor areas of the city, but the kind of knowledge had been lost about them. They hadn't continued for some reason. I've heard of various examples where people are using biogas for converting to electricity. I think the most organized one was not in Bangladesh. It was in India. I heard about one on Kalimantan where they're using palm oil waste for generating biogas and then converting that into electricity. In the same project, Energy on the Move, though, we were working also Bangladesh and Nepal and 2 countries in Africa too, Nigeria and South Sudan. And there was definitely working with informal settlements. We were coming across examples. I mean, I think in Kenya, they were doing some urban biogas systems linked to the sanitation issues as well. And then there is a very interesting study from Ghana by, it's called, there's an article called Wastelandia by, I'm afraid the name immediately, I can't recall the name, but the article, Wastelandia. And that's about a commercial, pay to use toilet system in a slum area, which is so clean, so well maintained that it's viable and it's where people prefer to go rather than all the terrible stories we've heard about flying plastic bags in other places. So that's a tremendous. I'd really like to know more about your projects. So I think we ought to meet up and compare notes, definitely.
Thank you, Ben. Laura Hepburn.
Hello, Happy New Year, everybody. Fantastic speech and videos and information, Ben. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Last year and the year before, I was part of a project slightly different, looking at pyrolyzing organic materials, but in Uganda and Nepal. Unfortunately, COVID we were due to visit, and unfortunately, COVID kind of made it a virtual event, which never really works as well. Yeah. But we were also looking at, and you touched on it there, about the different generations, and what the different generations need from that energy. So the older generations were looking at cooking, farming. The younger generations, it was quite inspiring, we're looking at different ways of charging mobile phones, funnily enough, yes. And also learning by light. They were using kerosene, which was leading to fires and deaths, and inhalation of very nasty toxics. But they wanted to learn, and they didn't get the hours during the day. It was always by night. So there was a lot of social impact there. And there was a lot of encouragement, again, going back to that, of how we could look at the crops and what was being used organically and what implications socially that had too, to create a fuel stock that was able to create energy. And although there was lots of people a part of that project that were looking at different fuel stocks and different ways of doing it, and could we, going back to the conversation that you had, take it from the people with the money and be able to provide something collaboratively for the people that had nothing? And was it going to be safe compared to the kerosene? Was it going to be something that could be used? And it was actually through the energy catalyst, through the Chamber of Commerce, that paid for the project. And I think Douglas is nodding, not sure there, or he might be nodding off, I'm not quite sure. But it was also that collaborative approach of projects trying to be able to create something small, often, and safe to help that future generation create energy. And it was a good think tank, but like I said, it got stalled because of COVID. So yes, I would love to be part of the think tank for that. That would be absolutely fantastic, especially from a different level where we're coming from right now.
That's really, I'd really like to hear about the work that you're doing, not only in Nepal, but Uganda as well. I've come across various people from Makerere University, I think Mary, what's she called? Anyway, but there's, I don't know if you know Matt Bailey-Smith at Northumbria.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. He's done work with youth and Uganda, hasn't he?
Yeah. And that was the key. I was very, because obviously there was chances to go to Hanoi. Obviously there was the Vietnamese side of things, but also there was the level of even the difference you've shown there, the difference between Nepal and Uganda, the feedstock difference is massive due to obviously lots of different reasons. So it was being very collaboratively and innovative, but based on obviously the geo nature of the different areas we were looking at because of the kind of crops that we could use. So great comparison. Thank you.
Okay, let's stay in touch and follow up those leads. Definitely.
Thanks, Laura. I see Felix. You have a question?
Hi, Felix. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you. Yes, it's nice to be in the DEI again. I have one comment to make, and I'm sure this is, I don't have to make that comment anymore for the DEI, but obviously Ben was talking about the kind of development context, broadly speaking, but the same rules for, you know, how generations might perceive energy differently, et cetera, also apply to our country, right? Just again, like I was actually thinking about, you know, like who kind of boasts about having this new energy system here in the UK, or who hasn't, and so just to kind of not think this is all very far away, the kind of theoretical implications that Ben was mentioning, but it's the same for energy anywhere else, right? But I have two very small ethnographic questions. Again, more like wanting to find out two things. One is about security. How secure are these systems? Is there any kind of problem with the gas igniting, you know, at points involuntarily, so to speak? And the second is, how long does it last? So after this guy has done the great work there, how long does it last? If, you know, when can I turn on my cooking, basically? What's the time frame? I just really curiosity there.
Okay, there's a pressure gauge that each household gets, so that you can see how much roughly that there'll be, and I think, you know, once you put every day or every other day, I think every 2 days at least, the whole digester requires some turbulence. It requires being moved around. I mean, the earlier designs, they had a kind of paddle system for steering it around in the middle, and I think that's been simplified now. But the daily input is definitely beneficial, I think, for the overall production of the gas. But again, they get a valve, pressure valve, so check a meter, so that they can check how much pressure there is. So some people have, I think, got more used to being able to calculate. Okay, we got the guests coming round. We got the festival of Eid in a bit, and we'll need to get in a bit more firewood just to supplement the known cooking quantities that they'll have to cater for in advance. On the sort of dangers of igniting, nobody reported to us having had done this, but it is there in most of the handbooks, the guidelines, the manuals that I've read about it. There is you know, you're advised not to smoke a cigarette with too closely to the unit, is a sort of general precautionary thing. And some of the families did say, oh yeah, no, we've got used to, you know, the smell. There is a bit of a kind of some neighbors observe this and comment on it, but we've got several of the respondents did say they kind of got familiar with it, and they don't find it a problem.
Thanks.
Okay, we're just coming up to the hour now. So 2 things. I'll come back to Ben in a moment, but just to, what have I done with it? I've opened up the seminar next week. Here we go. I thought I'd lost it. So in 2 weeks' time, we're staying in South Asia, and the DEI seminar series will be on clean electricity and electricity market transformations in Pakistan, journey, challenges and ways forward. And it will be a great chance to welcome for the first time one of our new associate fellows, Mohammed Falsai Sharif, who's currently at the Ministry of Energy in Pakistan. So that's coming up in 2 weeks' time. For now, Ben, thank you very much indeed for a delightful presentation today. I think it's the first time we've seen anyone mixing cow dung and water on a DEI seminar, possibly further, but demonstrates, for me at least, very beautifully, it's not just all about the technology that the physicists or the chemists or the engineers can bring to the party here, but it's the practical application. And what you showed beautifully well today is just that, operating both in Bangladesh and Nepal. So Ben, thanks from me, thanks from all the audience, and see you in 2 weeks' time.